Hey, welcome back. You're here again, and I'm really glad you are. So, before we go wandering down some damp medieval corridors tonight, I'd like you to take a moment, really, just a moment for yourself. Maybe you're curled up in bed already good. If not, go ahead, straighten that blanket over your shoulders, let the pillow cradle your head just right. If there's a lamp flickering in the corner of the room, maybe dim it down. Let the shadows grow a little longer on your walls. Tonight, we're going somewhere cold and drafty and far, far from the warmth of your blanket. But don't worry, you'll be safe. All you have to do is listen. Now, close your eyes if you want, or leave them half open, letting your mind drift between the now and the then. Because tonight, we're slipping back to the Middle Ages, past the castles and the knights, past the queens in heavy velvet robes. We're going deeper, underground, behind locked doors and iron gates, where life moved slower, smells lingered longer, and secrets had the patience to rot. You know, we've all seen those movie dungeons, dark caves with torches and skeletons clanking around in rusty chains. But that's the thing about stories. The truth, well, the truth is so much quieter. So much more ordinary, and so much more human. In those days, a prison wasn't always this sinister pit of screaming torture. Sometimes, it was just a tower room with a straw-stuffed mattress, if you were lucky. Or a hole in the ground where your feet went numb from the cold stone beneath. Picture this. You're standing at the edge of a fortress moat. The drawbridge rattles as you cross it. Your boots slick with mud. You can hear your own heartbeat, louder than the hush of the guard around you. There's a smell in the air, sharp and damp, like wet hay mixed with stale sweat. The heavy wooden door creaks open, iron hinges protesting like old bones. And just like that, you're inside. Behind you, the daylight shrinks into a thin slice of gray. Ahead, it's the world of the jailer. Keys jangling from his belt, a crooked grin that says maybe, just maybe, your stay here will depend less on your crime and more on how heavy your purse is. Funny how nothing changes, right? Even now, we slip coins under tables to get what we want. But in those stone corridors, a few silver pennies could mean a softer bed, an extra scrap of bread, or the difference between walking out alive and never seeing the sun again. Can you hear it? The echo of distant footsteps on flagstones. The hushed weeping of someone 2 cells down. A low cough that rattles through the damp air. If you tilt your head, you might catch a whisper, words that drift through the bars, never quite reaching you. Secrets carried on the chill that seeps through the cracks. But don't worry about the cold. You're not really there. You're here, tucked under your blanket, breathing slow, feeling the weight of the day slip off your shoulders like an old coat. All you have to do is listen. Tonight, we'll walk with the prisoners who came through these doors. We'll watch their eyes adjust to the gloom, see what they carried in their pockets, if they had pockets at all. We'll eavesdrop on the guards, hear the rusty gates slam shut, and maybe, just maybe, feel the straw crunch underfoot as we wander cell to cell. So, thank you for being here. Thank you for letting your mind drift with me. There's no hurry. This story moves at its own pace. Just a trickle of cold water down a mossy wall, a whisper through a keyhole. Nothing to fear. You're safe, warm, listening. And when you're ready, when the shadows on your ceiling look like old stone arches, we'll take the next step. Deeper in. Just breathe in. Breathe out. Let the chains clink somewhere far away. I'll be here. And so will you. Ready? Let's begin. Imagine waking up to cold stone pressing against your cheek. Not the softness of your pillow, not the comforting dip of your mattress, but stone, rough and damp, like the bottom of an old well. You shift a little, and straw crackles beneath you. It clings to your hair, your skin. You're not sure if it's the straw that smells musty or if that smell is coming from you. Picture this. You're a young farmer's son. You're nobody special. Just a pair of hands that used a tug carrot from the soil, mend a fence, pass a crust of bread to your sister. One morning you slipped 2 loaves under your coat. They weren't even yours to begin with. Maybe your mother's sick. Maybe your baby brother's crying with hunger. Either way, the local bailiff's men catch you by the wrist before you've even wiped the crumbs from your mouth. Now, there's no courtroom drama. No powdered wigs. No long speeches. There's just the scrape of iron on wood as they lock your wrists in shackles. Cold rings that bite at the skin. Your heart pounds, not just from fear, but from shame. The village stares as you're led away, eyes darting between your ragged boots and the priest who crosses himself behind you. The castle looms ahead, bigger than any barn you've ever seen, thick stone walls that swallow sound and spit out secrets. The drawbridge groans under your weight. You feel the cold of the moat rise up in a clammy mist. One of the guards gives you a shove. Not too hard. They're not cruel, just bored. The jailer waits by the door, a ring of keys heavy on his belt, each one tapping his hip like a ticking clock. Inside, the air is different. It tastes of damp wood, rust, and something sour you can't quite name. You duck your head through the door, and there's that sound. The echo. Your boots slap the stone floor, and the sound bounces back. Louder than you expect, like the walls themselves are gossiping about you. They lead you down a passage so narrow that your shoulders brush cold stone on both sides. There's no torchlight here, just the faintest flicker of a candle far ahead. Your breath comes out in misty puffs, and you catch yourself counting your steps. 3, 4, 5. Maybe if you reach 100, you'll wake up in your bed again. The straw gone. The chains gone. Your mother humming by the hearth. Well, of course you don't. At the end of the passage, the cell door yawns open. It's a wooden door, swollen with damp, scarred with deep cuts where others before you have scratched out prayers, curses, names that no one remembers now. The hinges creak in protest, metal grinding like a toothache in the dark. Inside, the cell is not as you feared, but that doesn't make it kind. The ceiling is low enough that you have to hunch your shoulders. In one corner, there's a pile of straw, half-rotten, the smell mixing with the sweet sting of urine soaked into the floor from someone who was here before you. There's a single barred window high above, just wide enough to let in a slice of daylight, but too small for hope. The guard gives you a look, not cruel, but tired. He says nothing as he locks you in. The click of the bolt slides through your bones like ice water. You run your fingers over the walls, feeling where the stone turns to damp, where it crumbles at the edges. Your breath comes faster now. You press your ear to the door, hoping to catch a voice, any voice, to remind you that the world still spins beyond these walls. Outside, the jailer's boots shuffle away. For a moment, the silence is absolute, heavy and suffocating, wrapping around your chest like a chain. Then you hear it, faint at first, then clearer, the low murmur of someone snoring a few cells down. A drip, drip, drip of water landing in a puddle. Somewhere, a mouse scurries over loose straw. Life, in the smallest ways, still crawls through this place. You sit, pull your knees to your chest, rest your head on them. Your eyes close, not to sleep, but to pretend. To slip, just for a second, back to the fields. To the smell of fresh earth under your fingernails. The sun warming your back as you haul a sack of grain. You promise yourself it won't be long. Someone will come, your mother, the baker, the village priest. They'll speak for you. The bailiff will understand. You're just a boy who is hungry. Just a boy who made a mistake. But then again, this is the Middle Ages. Mistakes linger. Straw rots. Stones hold secrets in their cracks for centuries. And you're just one more name to be whispered through a barred window when the wind blows right. So, for now, you breathe in that damp, sour air. You let the straw prickle your legs. You listen to the echo of your own heartbeat. a steady drum that reminds you you're still here. Not free, not comfortable, but alive. And somewhere, down the corridor, the jailer's keys rattle like an iron lullaby. The candle flickers, and the stone walls listen like they always have. Ready for the next step? Good. Just stay warm under your blanket. I'll be here to guide you deeper, where secrets wait behind each locked door. Drift with me. There's more to see, more to hear, and plenty of shadows to wander through. Next, let's drift a little further in, deeper into the belly of these old stone walls. You've probably pictured a dungeon before, the classic kind. Dark as ink, walls slick with dripping water, iron chains bolted to the stones, maybe a skeleton or two rattling in the corner just for drama. But here's the curious part. Real medieval dungeons were far less theatrical than the stories would have you believe. Most prisoners never saw a grand, torchlit chamber full of rusty torture racks. Instead, they found themselves stuffed into spaces that were never even designed to hold human bodies. Imagine the back corner of a castle cellar, the base of a guard tower, or a forgotten storeroom down by the moat. That was your cell. Picture this. You shuffle through a narrow passage that smells of old turnips and wet limestone. The stones under your feet are slick from centuries of leaks that no mason bothers to patch. A rat darts across your boot, a tiny heartbeat against the hush of damp air. And then, the jailer gestures to a hole in the wall. It's not much more than a stone closet, really. Maybe 6 steps across, maybe 4 wide, just enough room for you to lie curled up on your side. The walls are thick. They swallow your voice when you speak, turning it into a mumble that loops back to you. There's straw on the ground because someone thought that might help with the chill. It doesn't. The straw is damp, riddled with tiny mites that tickle your skin at night. So you lie awake scratching until you give up and let them feast. Look up. There's a single window, if you're lucky. Not a grand window with a view of moonlit battlements. No, it's more like a slit carved between stones, maybe the size of your hand. Just wide enough for a thin ray of sun to find you for an hour or two each day. Or a breeze, if the wind is feeling generous. In winter, that breeze is your enemy, biting into your bones until your teeth chatter like loose coins in a purse. Sometimes, these cells weren't even meant to be cells. Maybe they were once a granary, their floors still sprinkled with the husks of wheat from a harvest long forgotten. Or a wine cellar, the air sour with the ghost of barrels that once brimmed with drink the prisoners would never taste. You might even find the scent of vinegar clinging to the walls, the remnant of spoiled casks left to rot in the dark. Listen for a moment. Can you hear the little noises? The shuffle of straw as you shift your aching back. The drip of water from a ceiling crack that's been weeping since before you were born. Far off, a guard's boots echo against stone, slow and heavy, like the march of time itself. Here's the thing. These spaces were not secure in the way you'd expect. Some cells were so ramshackle that prisoners would squeeze between loose stones or bribe a drunkard for a rusty key. Others were so deep within the castle's guts that you could scream until your throat bled and no one would ever hear you. And yet, not every cell was equal. If you had the right friends or the right coin, you might convince the jailer to upgrade your quarters. Maybe you get a cell closer to the kitchen, where warm air seeps through cracks in the walls and the smell of boiling stew teases you through the night. Maybe you get a second blanket, something that stinks of goats but feels like heaven when your toes go numb. Imagine running your hand across the stone at your back. It's rough and pitted where countless others have scratched their marks. Initials, prayers, pleas for mercy, little poems etched in shaky lines. You can almost feel the loneliness pressed into those grooves, layer upon layer like rings in an old tree. Sometimes, if the wind blows just right, you might hear a fellow prisoner through the wall. A cough, A muffled sob, a song hummed under breath, a tune to keep madness at bay. Strange how a single voice, invisible but so close, can become your anchor. So, these weren't the grand, cinematic dungeons of your nightmares. They were small, damp, makeshift places. Places where time dripped slower than the water down the walls. Where punishment wasn't always a rack or a blade. Sometimes it was just the silence, the cold, the constant scratch of vermin at your skin. Still, in the dark, every prisoner found a way to claim a sliver of comfort. A straw bundle arranged just so. A scrap of cloth rolled into a makeshift pillow. A fingernail tracing tiny prayers into the stone. Small things. Trivial, maybe, but they reminded you that you were still human. Still you. Still hoping. And you, safe in your warm bed tonight. You can almost hear that. The hush of damp straw, the drip of water, the sigh of someone who knows they won't leave these walls for weeks, months, maybe years. But tonight you do. You drift away from the stone and the straw and the scratch of lice. You breathe deeper, softer, letting the imagined cold stay locked in the past while you float forward, back to me. Because the jailer is waiting, keys in hand. He's got stories, secrets, bargains behind closed doors. We'll follow him next. For now, rest your head a little heavier on your pillow. The shadows of those old cells can't touch you here. Not tonight. Ready? Let's go find the man with the keys. Next, let's follow the sound of those keys. Can you hear them? That soft, metallic jingle echoing down the stone corridor, like wind chimes made of iron teeth. There's something strangely comforting about it, isn't there? As if each clink is a reminder that behind every locked door, there's a man, just a man, who decides whether it stays shut or swings open. So picture him, the jailer. Not the brute you'd expect from some dark fable, but a man with rough hands and a belly that strains the buttons of his leather tunic. His beard is flecked with crumbs from a pie he half finished before coming on duty. His boots are scuffed from pacing these same halls, back and forth, wearing down the flagstones a little more with every step. And then there are his keys, always those keys. Dozens of them, heavy as gilt, hanging from a thick iron ring at his hip. Some are jagged and new, edges still sharp enough to nick your thumb. Others are smooth, their teeth worn soft by years of use. You might wonder if he even remembers which key opens which door. But he does, he always does. Because in this place, the jailer's memory is as valuable as gold. You see, the jailer is more than a guard. He's the broker of hope. He's the man who knows which cell stays cold and which one miraculously gets a blanket before the first frost. He knows whose water jug is filled to the brim and whose leaks slowly until the prisoner curls up, parched and shivering. Picture him making his rounds by candlelight. The flame flickers across his pockmarked face as he pauses at each cell. Sometimes he says nothing at all, just peers through the bars, keys tapping against the stone like a lullaby of threat and promise. Other times he leans in close, the smell of sour wine clinging to his breath. He murmurs questions that sound innocent enough but aren't. Got anyone looking out for you, lad? How's your mother doing these days? Is that purse of yours still jingling like it used to? For the right price. A coin slipped through the bars. A favor whispered when no one's listening. The jailer might ease your stay. A bigger bundle of straw for your aching back. A message smuggled out to a father with enough coin to bribe a magistrate. A bite of cheese, stale but better than thin broth and hope. Sometimes the deal isn't coin at all. Maybe it's gossip. Imagine two prisoners, one pressed against the bars, whispering secrets about another man 3 cells down. He's planning something, they say. He's got a friend outside, says there's a tunnel. The jailer nods, never showing his cards. He tucks that secret away like a crumb in his beard, ready to trade it to someone else for something better. And here's where it gets darker if you lean in close enough. Because the jailer's loyalty doesn't belong to you, or the guards, or even the lord of the castle. It belongs to whoever keeps him fed and drunk and warm when the frost creeps under his collar. If your purse runs dry, so does his mercy. If you break your promises, he breaks yours, sometimes your bones too, if the mood strikes him. Picture a man who once gave him a silver ring, a family heirloom, passed down for generations. The prisoner swore it was worth a fortune, and maybe it was. The jailer turned it over in his meaty palm, squinting at the faint engraving inside. That night, the prisoner got an extra blanket, a small hunk of salted pork, a promise that his cell door would be accidentally left unlocked for an hour after sundown. But when the time came, the jailer leaned against the wall, keys rattling softly, and did nothing at all. The door stayed locked. The ring stayed tucked in his boot, a glint of silver that bought him 3 nights of wine at the tavern outside the gate. It wasn't always betrayal, though. Sometimes it was kindness, in the only way a man like him knew how. A young woman, accused of witchcraft because she mixed herbs for a sick child. He let her mother visit after dark, pressing her thin hand through the bars. They talked in hurried whispers, tears sliding down their cheeks into the straw. When the guards asked, the jailer shrugged, never saw her. Maybe she slipped in through the window. There was no window, but the mother left a basket of eggs on the table in his quarters that night, and he pretended not to notice when she did it again the next week. Funny, isn't it? How power shifts in the shadows. How the clang of a key can feel like a mercy or a death sentence, depending on how heavy your pockets are or how heavy the jailer's conscience feels that day. So, next time you think of medieval prison, don't just picture the chains and iron bars. Picture the man with the keys, trudging through those drafty passages, boots squelching in mud tracked in from the courtyard. His breath fogs in the cold, his hand closes around that ring of iron teeth, and somewhere behind a locked door, a prisoner holds his breath, praying for the jingle that means maybe, just maybe, tonight will be different. You, though, you don't need to pay a thing. You're here, warm, eyes fluttering shut as you listen to secrets that have been traded for centuries. The keys clink on, echoing down your hallway of dreams. And somewhere, far back in that damp stone maze, the jailer pauses, candle guttering in the dark. He hums to himself, pockets your bribe, and moves on. Next, we'll find out what's waiting when the jailer brings your dinner, or what passes for dinner down here anyway. For now, rest. Let that ring of keys jingle you a lullaby. It's only going to get colder from here, but you'll stay warm. I promise. Meanwhile, you might be wondering what's waiting on the other side of that squeaking door when the jailer brings your supper, if you can even call it that. See, dinner in a medieval cell wasn't some steaming plate of roasted meat and buttered bread like the feasts above in the Lord's Hall. Down here, food was less a meal and more a gesture, a reminder that you were still alive and that the jailer, keys jangling at his hip, decided you would stay that way. Picture it. You're curled up on your scratchy straw pallet, your stomach twisting and turning on itself. Outside, boots scuff along the corridor, and that familiar rattle of keys grows louder, closer. You can almost taste the stale air that slips through the crack under your door. Then, the door grinds open, just enough for a heavy hand to shove something inside. It's a bowl, if you can call a dented wooden dish a bowl, and inside is a thin broth, gray, and flecked with something that might once have been a carrot. Maybe a shred of cabbage, if you're lucky. The smell is warm, but it carries the sour tang of meat boiled too long or not long enough. Alongside the broth, a crust of bread, yesterday's bread, maybe the day before's, hard enough to scrape the roof of your mouth raw, but soft enough in the middle to soak up the soup if you wait a while. You pull the bowl close, fingers trembling with cold. There's a greasy film that floats on top of the broth, shimmering in the candlelight that slips through the bars. You breathe it in anyway, because hunger has a way of turning anything into a feast. And just when you think you're alone in this ritual, you hear it, the faintest rustle in the straw behind you. A mouse, maybe two. Tiny paws patter over the stone, fur brushing against the straw. They've been waiting for this moment too, you see. They're part of the deal. You get to eat, they get the scraps. Sometimes they're bold. A whiskered nose pokes out from under your blanket, beady eyes glinting at the crust in your hand. You'd think you'd hate them, these little thieves in the dark, but somehow they make the silence bearable. At least you're not the only creature down here who wants to live. Imagine breaking off a corner of your bread, pressing it to the stone floor. You lie still, your breath fogging the chill air as the mouse creeps closer. Its tiny feet are so quiet, you feel its presence more than you hear it. A soft, living heartbeat in this place of dead air and waiting ghosts. For a few minutes, you're not just a prisoner anymore. You're a host, a king of crumbs and broth, sharing your miserable bounty with something smaller, hungrier than you. But the jailer doesn't care for your charity. He comes back, boot heels echoing down the hall. His eyes sweep the cell, catching the mouse scurrying for a crack in the wall. He snorts through his crooked teeth, mutters something about vermin, and drags the bowl away if you're slow to finish. No second helpings here, no matter how light the broth. Still, some prisoners found ways to make dinner more than a bowl of thin soup. If your family had silver to spare, maybe you'd hear a gentle knock at the iron door just before dawn, a wife's voice through the bars, slipping you a bundle of cloth. Inside, a heel of cheese, an apple from last autumn's harvest, a small meat pie still warm if the wind was kind. Imagine the smell, buttery crust, a wisp of time, the fat pooling in your palm like a promise that someone still loves you out there in the world beyond the walls. Of course, the jailer took a share. Always. A wedge of cheese vanished, a bite of pie missing from the crust. Small tolls for silence. Small taxes for turning his back while your loved ones slipped you scraps through the dark. And for the ones no one visited, the ones with no coin, no kin, no stolen pies, dinner stayed the same. A thin gruel, a stale crust. Maybe not even that if the jailer had been drinking or the kitchen boy forgot you. And the mice came anyway, squeaking softly in the corners, a lullaby of hunger that never slept. So tonight, as you sink deeper under your blanket, think of that bowl on the stone floor. The broth going cold while the prisoner huddles over it, savoring each spoonful as if it were a banquet. Think of the mouse, fur warm, paws delicate, waiting for its share. Two souls in the dark, alive for one more night, because a bowl of watery soup and a crust of bread are enough to keep hope breathing, just barely. You, though, you've got better. Maybe there's a late night snack waiting in your kitchen, or a cup of tea on your bedside table. Or maybe you don't need anything at all, just this story drifting in one ear, out the other, mixing with dreams of stone walls and tiny feet skittering across straw. Don't worry, the mice won't nibble at your crumbs tonight. You're safe, you're warm, and when you wake, you'll find no iron door, no broth gone cold. Just your pillow, your soft sheets, your room filled with the quiet of your own choosing. And next, we'll slip away from dinner's faint warmth and find the faces that appear at the barred window. The ones who slip secrets through the dark, pressed into your trembling hands. Because even in the coldest cell, a knock at the door can mean the difference between hope and despair. Sleep easy for now. I'll be here, waiting to tell you more. Next, let's stay a while by that barred window the one that shivers when the wind pushes through its rusty hinges. Because even in these walls of mossy stone and rotting straw, sometimes a knock comes in the night. A reminder that somewhere outside, someone still remembers your name. Picture this. You've been counting days and scratches on the wall. You've run out of space. You've run out of hope, too, almost. Then one dusk, when the shadows are stretching like lazy cats across the floor, you hear it. A whisper of a rustle, a soft knock at the little door in your cell, or maybe a gentle tap at the grate. It's not the guard this time, not the jailer with his keys and his stale breath. It's a voice that quivers like your heartbeat. Imagine it's your sister. She's wrapped in a shawl she borrowed from your mother, the one that still smells of lavender and the hearth smoke that clings to everything back home. She leans close to the bars, her eyes wide and glistening in the torchlight that flickers down the corridor. She whispers your name like a secret only the stones should hear. And in her hands, something small, wrapped in cloth. Her fingers slip through the gap, just enough space to push that parcel into your waiting palms. It's warm, heavier than you expect. Inside, you find a heel of bread, darker than the scraps the jailer tosses you. Hidden in a fold, a tiny twist of paper. You open it, and there, in your mother's crooked scrawl, is a line of words. We're praying for you. Hold on. You read it twice. 3 times. You press it to your chest, to the spot that aches worst of all. Family visits weren't written into the rules, but rules bend when coins slide into the jailer's pocket, or when the guard outside the gate looks the other way for the price of a stolen kiss from a worried wife. Sometimes the visitor is a father who stands straight and stiff, pressing coins into the jailer's hand with one breath and cursing your foolishness with the next. Other times it's a child, too young to understand why Papa can't come home, standing on tiptoe to see you through a hole that feels too small for so much distance. Picture the wife of a man accused of stealing a pig, a petty theft that might buy him weeks in a lice-ridden cell if he's lucky, or a whipping post if he's not. She comes each night, apron strings flapping in the wind, hair falling from her braid as she hurries up the muddy path. She brings him scraps of bacon tucked into a cloth, sometimes a jar of ale that tastes of freedom, if only for a few sips. She whispers about the children, how they miss him, how the youngest refuses to eat his porridge until Papa comes home. The guard clears his throat behind her, reminding her that time is money, money is mercy, and mercy never comes free. Sometimes, of course, the knock is more dangerous than comforting. Imagine a pair of hands slipping you not bread but a small blade, hidden in a crust, wrapped in a greasy rag. A cousin, maybe, or a friend from the tavern who swears they've planned it all. The jailer's shift change, the loose brick behind the cot, the rope tossed over the wall when the moon is high. It all sounds so simple, whispered through iron bars in the hush of midnight. But when the time comes, the rope never appears, the brick stays firm, the blade rusts under your mattress, and the cousin disappears into the woods. Your trust is cold and thin as the soup you'll slurp tomorrow. Still, these visits, they're lifelines even when they break you. They remind you that the world outside hasn't forgotten you entirely, that a mother still needs bread with your name in her prayers, that a brother still argues with the bailiff for a sliver of mercy, that a lover still stands in the rain, cloak pulled tight, waiting for a chance to press her lips to the bars just once. The gifts they bring are small, but they matter. A wedge of cheese that tastes like summer when your teeth sink in. A scrap of cloth to bind the sores on your wrist where the iron rubs you raw. A tiny vial of herbal tonic, pinched from the village wise woman. It smells sharp with rosemary and hope. And sometimes they bring you words. Words wrapped in gossip. Who married whom? Who died last winter? Who named their baby after you despite your shame? Words that remind you your name still echoes beyond these walls. Words that keep your mind from rotting while your body waits out the slow crawl of medieval justice. You, warm there in your bed. You know how precious it is to hear a voice you love when the dark closes in. Imagine that comfort compressed through a crack in the wall, muffled by stone, sweetened by risk. Imagine the feel of your mother's hand pressed to yours through a rusted grate, the warmth seeping into your frozen skin for just a heartbeat. That's what family visits meant. Not salvation, not rescue, just a little warmth that made the straw less cruel for one more night. So tonight, as you drift closer to sleep, listen for that faint knock at your window. No real iron bars here, just the hush of your breath in the room you call yours. No jailer counting coins at your door. Just you, safe under your blanket, holding all your secrets close. When you wake, there'll be no one slipping crust through a gap in the stone. You'll have your own bread, your own warmth, your own freedom to walk past your door anytime you wish. But for now, linger here a while longer. I'll be waiting, ready to tell you what happens when the chains loosen and the door swings open, if only for a moment. Next, we'll wander into the story of the prisoners who could leave. Not all at once, but sometimes they'd taste the world beyond the gate and come back before the sun dipped behind the walls. Because freedom, like mercy, was always a negotiation. Stay with me. The night's still young, and there's more to see behind these walls. Next, let's push open a door that doesn't slam shut behind you. Not completely, anyway. Because here's something people often forget when they think of medieval prisoners. Not every locked door stayed locked all the time. Freedom, like everything else down here, was slippery. Something you could taste in tiny mouthfuls if you knew how to ask, beg, or pay for it. Picture this. Dawn breaking over the fortress walls. Cold mist rising from the moat. The village rooster crowing on the far side of the gate. And there you are, yes you, standing in the courtyard in shackles, a guard at your elbow, your wrists red from the iron bite. It doesn't feel like freedom yet, does it? But wait. The guard grunts, lifts a heavy iron key from his belt, and with a scrape and a sigh, the shackles drop. He squints at you, thumb tapping the hilt of his short sword. Be back before the bell tolls at sundown, he mutters, or the rope will find you tomorrow. And just like that, you're free for a few precious hours. Free, but not quite. The village is your cage now. You shuffle past the butcher's stall, eyes down, listening to the whispers that follow you like flies. A boy you knew once, the blacksmith's son, spits at your feet. An old woman crosses herself when your shadow falls across her door. But you keep moving. You keep moving because you need bread, or coins, or to see your mother's face at the cottage window. You knock, soft at first, then harder. And when she opens the door, she gasps, hand pressed to her chest like she's just seen a ghost. You stand there, iron rings still chafing your ankles, the smell of the cell clinging to your skin like mold. And when she steps aside to let you in, it's not warmth that greets you first. It's the sharp smell of cabbage stew, the tick of the hearth's embers, the sight of your father turning away so you don't see the tears. This is your reward. One bowl of soup ladled into your hands, still hot enough to scald your tongue. A piece of bread with real butter, soft, rich, so different from the stale crust dropped in your cell. You sit on a rickety stool while your mother dabs at your wrists with a rag dipped in vinegar, her fingers trembling. Your brother watches from the corner, wide-eyed, chewing his thumb. No one talks about the cell, the guards, the rope that waits if you run. They don't need to. The shadows of the bars are there anyway, falling across the floorboards, even in the safety of your home. Sometimes, this was the life of a debt prisoner. The man who owed more than his purse could repay. The jailer would open the door each morning and say, "Go earn your keep." So you trudge through the field you used to plow as a free man, breaking your back to gather enough coin to buy another night of damp straw. And when the sun began its slow dip behind the church steeple, you'd shuffle back, head low, purse jingling just enough to keep the jailer's grin wide and his keys turning smooth in the lock. And sometimes, just sometimes, a prisoner never came back. Maybe they slipped into the forest, hoping the tangle of trees would hide them from the bailiff's dogs. Maybe they vanished down a crooked alley, hand pressed to the purse they'd stolen from their own mother's shelf. But freedom snatched like that rarely lasted. The Lord's men would come knocking at every door, boots muddy, eyes cold. A sister might be dragged before the magistrate, a father fined twice over, until someone coughed up your hiding place. Imagine the choice, then a straw mat in a cold cell, or a bed of bracken under a bush while the dogs sniff you out in the dark. For many, the cell, miserable as it was, felt safer than the hungry world outside. At least in here, you knew the routine. The rats were predictable. The jailer's price never really changed. And hope, twisted thing that it was, stayed alive in tiny ways. Picture the ones who walked back through that gate at dusk, boots leaving muddy prints in the courtyard. They'd stand before the guard again, head bowed. The iron shackles would snap shut with a click that felt like the end of a prayer. The door would groan open, straw and shadows swallowing them whole once more. And yet, even then, they knew tomorrow or next week they might taste the sun again. The smell of bread baking in a village oven, the rough kiss of wind on their cheeks. Enough to keep their spirit flickering when the nights grew longer than their hope. Strange, isn't it? How freedom could be so small, so conditional, a chain made of hours instead of iron. A walk through a muddy street that cost you every scrap of pride you had left. A brief glance at your mother's eyes, wet with fear because she knows you will vanish behind the door again before the moon rises. And you, here in your warm bed, blanket pulled to your chin, you get to leave whenever you want. No iron key needed. No guard to nod you through the gate. You're free in ways they couldn't have imagined. Though sometimes, just sometimes, you forget what a treasure that is. So tonight, let this tiny taste of borrowed freedom remind you. Not every door stays locked forever. Not every prisoner lost his chance to feel the sun, even if it meant walking back through the bars before the bell tolled. Next, we'll drift into the waiting, that slow, torturous crawl of days and weeks. Because after the door clanged shut again, all they could do was wait. For justice, for punishment, for a pardon, or for nothing at all. And that waiting, well, that was its own kind of prison. Sleep softly, for now. We'll wander through the corridors of time again soon. Just say the word, and we'll follow the drip of hope down the cold stone walls together. Next, let's sit with them in the stillness, because the worst thing about these stone walls was never the rats, or the lice, or even the jailer's sour breath. It was the waiting, the slow drip of justice, colder than the water, seeping down from cracks in the ceiling, more gnawing than the hunger that lived in your belly day and night. Picture this. You're lying on your back, eyes fixed on a single beam of sunlight that crawls across the wall for an hour or two each day. It's the only clock you have now, the only sign that the world outside your cell still spins while you lie in the same straw, your hair tangled, your skin pressed against stone that never warms. Your ears start to crave sounds. Footsteps, keys, a distant clang of iron. Anything that might mean someone's coming, to open the door, to call your name, to say it's time. But most of the time, no one comes. You listen instead to the drip, drip, drip of water trickling down the stones. A mouse scratches at the corner of your mat, but you don't bother to shoo it away anymore. It's company in its own small, skittering way. Some days you might hear voices outside your door, the scratch of a quill on parchment, the bored tone of a scribe reading out your name, half mangling it in his rush to get back to his warm bench by the fire. Maybe a guard laughs at something you can't hear. Maybe the Lord's steward mutters, "We'll deal with him next week." You catch those scraps and hold them tight. Promises you never asked for, each one a single match in an endless winter. Justice, they called it. But there was nothing swift or noble about it. Not here. You see, trials were slow things in the Middle Ages, slower than a plague cart rolling through the village, slower than crops growing in a frozen field. The local lord might be off hunting with his hawks, or feasting in another manner. Your fate tucked away in a dusty scroll on his clerk's shelf. Imagine a man accused of stealing a loaf. He sits in the dark, fingernails chewed raw, praying that the miller's wife will swear it was just a misunderstanding. He imagines her at the market, swearing before God that he paid her, that it was all a mistake. But days pass, then weeks. The stew she sold him rots in his gut long before anyone comes to hear his side of the tale. Picture a woman, belly round with child, locked away for gossip. Someone called her a witch when a cow fell sick and refused to stand. She rocks herself on the straw, humming lullabies to the baby who may or may not see daylight before she does. Outside, the village priest argues with the steward. The steward shrugs. The Lord will decide, he says, but the Lord is nowhere to be found. And so they wait. All of them. Some grow thin and sickly, their coughs echoing down the corridors like ghostly sermons. Others press ears to stone walls, straining for gossip. Who's been pardoned? Who's been dragged out to the square? Who'll find rope instead of mercy waiting for them in the dawn? Sometimes the waiting is worse than the sentence. When your mind turns over every possibility, the fine you can't pay, the branding iron that might press its red kiss into your skin, the stocks that await you in the village square, rotten eggs, and jeers thrown by neighbors you once called friends. And here's the strange part. The longer you wait, the more you start to fear the knock on the door you prayed for. Because the knock means the answer has come. And answers in these stone halls rarely come with kindness tucked under their arm. Still, the mind clings to hope like straw clings to your skin. It loops old prayers in the dark, words you haven't spoken since you were a child kneeling at your mother's knee. Maybe tomorrow, you whisper, maybe tomorrow they'll remember I'm here. Outside your tiny window, if you're lucky enough to have one, the seasons roll by, slow as the drip of water from the ceiling. You watch frost crawl across the sill in winter, vines sprout green tendrils in spring, flies dance lazy circles in the summer heat. Your own skin changes too, softer in some places, raw and cracked in others. Time leaks into your bones, and you wonder, now and then, if it's ever really going to end. And when it does, well, that's its own story. Sometimes the verdict comes with a clang and a bark command. Up, out, you're free, or you're not. Other times, it's a whisper from the jailer, eyes darting down the hall. Tomorrow, he says, best say your prayers. And you nod because what else is there to do? But for now, you wait. And in the waiting, you listen to the straw crackling under your shifting weight, to the mouse scratching a pattern at your feet, to the heartbeat that tells you you're still here, still hoping, still caught between the drip, 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 and the echo of footsteps that might mean your name will finally be called. You, though, you don't have to wait. Not for a verdict. Not for mercy from some distant lord who's never seen your face. You get to drift off whenever you choose, safe behind your unlocked door, your soft pillow tucked beneath your cheek. So rest now, and when you wake, you'll find no stone walls, no damp straw, no slow, cruel crawl of justice dragging you behind it. Only daylight, and freedom enough to step through your own doorway without looking over your shoulder. Next, we'll lean closer to those whispers and secrets, because gossip flows even in the darkest corners. The prisoners talked. The guards talked more. And sometimes Secrets were worth more than a bribe slipped into a waiting hand. Sleep easy for now, and when you're ready, I'll tell you what they heard through the cracks in the stone. I'll be right here. Next, let's lean a little closer to the cracks in these old walls. Because waiting in a medieval prison wasn't just the ache in your bones or the slow gnaw of an empty stomach. It was the restlessness of your mind, searching for something, anything, to hold on to while the days crawled by. And so, they listened. They listened for gossip, for scraps of stories that floated through the corridors like the scent of someone else's dinner. Just enough to remind you you weren't alone, even if you wished you were. Picture it, the corridor at midnight, a torch sputtering out, its smoke curling against the damp stones. A guard's boots thudding away as he disappears around a corner, keys jingling softly like a lullaby. And behind the doors, behind each rough-hewn plank and iron hinge, the whispers begin. You might think the prisoners would sit silent, too beaten down by the cold and hunger to speak. But the human mind is stubborn like that. It needs noise to drown out fear. So, imagine a man pressed up to the crack in his wall, ear flattened to the damp stone, straining to hear the next cell over. A voice drifts through, cracked, wheezing, telling a story about a magistrate's wife who visits the jailer when the moon is full. Someone chuckles. Another voice cuts in. That's not true. She hasn't come in months. But who knows? Down here, truth is just another coin to barter. And it wasn't just the prisoners whispering through the walls. The guards talked too, louder than they should, thinking no one would hear or remember. Picture two of them huddled by a drafty window, breath steaming in the cold. They swap tales between swigs of watered ale. Who bribed who, which prisoner might swing come dawn, which might walk free. They speak carelessly, words tumbling out, never imagining the ears pressed to the other side of the stones, collecting every syllable like breadcrumbs in the dark. Sometimes these rumors were cruel, stories that wormed their way under your skin when you least needed them. A man would lie awake, replaying the guard's drunken mutter. Lords had enough of him. He'll hang next week. But maybe next week would come and go, and he'd still be there, straw scratching his scalp, hope clinging by its broken fingernails. Yet sometimes a whisper was a lifeline. Picture a woman 2 cells down, a petty thief with a quick tongue. She hears the steward's page talking about pardons being handed out for the harvest festival. So she passes along, voice low through a crumbling gap in the wall. Hold on, wait till Michaelmas. They'll be lenient, you'll see. True or not, it was enough to make another prisoner sleep with a smile for the first time in weeks. Can you imagine it? A whole hidden network, stitched together through holes no bigger than your thumb. The walls that trap them also carry their secrets. And if you knew how to listen, really listen, you could gather more than straw under your head at night. You could gather stories that turned into hope or bargaining chips, or maybe the final push to slip a coin into the jailer's palm at just the right moment. Picture a boy, no more than 16, ears pressed so close to the stone that the cold seeps into his bones. He hears a guard boasting that the southern wall's loose, that a drunk mason did a shoddy job sealing the old arrow slit. That boy, hope flickering in his chest, might scrape at that wall for days with a spoon or a shard of brick, all because of a single overheard boast. Maybe it leads nowhere. Maybe it buys him a few hours of breath under the moon before the dogs catch his scent. Or maybe, just maybe, he makes it past the orchard and never looks back. And all the while, the gossip snakes down the corridors. The prisoners become shadows of each other's lives. They know whose wife visits at dusk, whose mother has stopped coming altogether, who's coughing too hard to last the winter. It's a cruel intimacy, born not of trust, but of necessity. The walls become diaries that answer back in a dozen voices when the darkness presses too close. Meanwhile, The jailer pretends not to hear. Or maybe he listens too, through the cracks in his office door, ears always twitching for secrets worth a coin or two. A snatched rumor could mean the difference between a prisoner's secret escape and the slap of chains on wrist before dawn. The jailer plays both sides, gathering gossip like dry straw to feed his little empire. And so the nights pass, word by word, rumor by rumor. Some true, some half-true, some born from the dreams of men who had nothing else to do but spin stories to keep madness at bay. Even the mice, it seemed, carried whispers on their tiny feet, scurrying from one cell to the next, paw steps pattering like a living message in the straw. You, though, you don't have to press your ear to the wall tonight. The only whispers you'll hear are these, drifting around you like smoke, warm and soft and harmless. No secrets to fear, no guards to catch you listening. Just my voice, filling your dark with tales that can't hurt you. Next, we'll find out what really lurked in the shadows when the door opened for something worse than gossip. Because the word torture has its own echo in these stones. Not always the horror story you expect, but always enough to make the whispers fall silent when a jailer drags a man down the hall. Sleep easy for now. And when you're ready, I'll be here to take you deeper, to the cold room where mercy seldom knocks. Next, let's step into the coldest room of all, the one everyone thinks they know so well. The torture chamber. The very words make your skin prickle, don't they? You imagine iron maidens snapping shut, spiked chairs, blazing braziers glowing like tiny suns in the dark. Chains hanging from walls slick with the screams of 100 poor souls. That's the story, you know. The tale whispered in taverns and painted in old woodcuts. But here's the truth that creeps through the cracks like an unwelcome draft. Real medieval torture was rarely that grand, or that constant, or that cinematic. Picture this. Not a cavernous dungeon dripping with shadows, but a small stone room, barely larger than the cells we've already wandered through. A single brazier flickers in the corner, the coals coughing up more smoke than heat. The air smells of old sweat, burnt tallow, and the faint tang of rust. There's a table, stained dark in places where something spilled or leaked long ago. If you stood there, you'd see the tools. Nothing fancy. No monstrous iron maidens. Instead, simple things that make your stomach twist because they're so ordinary. A set of ropes, a block of wood, a pair of thumb screws that look almost harmless in the torchlight, a bucket of water cold as any winter river, waiting to be poured drop by drop over a face pressed tight against the board. Imagine being dragged from your cell, feet scraping the stone, your eyes wide in the torch's glare. The guard doesn't look at you. He doesn't have to. He's done this before. Maybe he hums under his breath to drown out the sound of your prayers. Maybe he mutters, "Should have paid the bailiff. Should have held your tongue." But the words don't matter now. The door opens with a groan that makes your teeth ache, and the room greets you with its terrible, quiet promise. Speak, and maybe you leave. Stay silent, and you'll wish you hadn't. It's not always grand tortures. There's no need for spiked wheels or blazing pincers when a rope and a ceiling beam will do. They tie your wrists behind your back, loop the rope over the beam, and haul you up until your shoulders pop and your breath comes out in wet gasps. Sometimes they tie weights to your ankles. Nothing but a few stones in a sack, just enough to make your arms feel like they tear off at the seams. The strappado, they called it. A fancy name for pain that was so simple, so effective, and so quiet that the lord upstairs could sip his wine without ever hearing your sobs. Other times it was water. They lay you out flat, bind your hands and feet so tight your skin went purple. Then the cloth, a rag, a scrap of linen, soaked in cold water, draped over your face, blocking your breath. And the water poured slow, cruelly patient, so that every trickle felt like drowning. Because that was the point, to make you believe death had already arrived, breath stolen by a single drip at a time. And the truth? Sometimes it worked. A man might spit out a confession whether it was true or not, because anything was better than that cloth, that rope, that endless drip of water finding its way into the hollows of your throat. He'd name his brother, his neighbor, the local priest, if it meant the jailer would stop twisting the screws on his fingers. And in the records, centuries later, his words would stand like gospel, ink on a yellowed page. Never mind that they were choked out between screams and sobs. But here's the curious part. Real torture wasn't as common as the tales make it sound. It was expensive. It needed time, strong arms, a room kept just private enough that the rumors stayed useful, but the Lord's dinner didn't turn sour at the sound of it. Many lords preferred the simpler route. A good beating, a week on bread and water, a promise of the stocks where shame would do what iron could not. And then, like everything in this place, there was the jailer's hand in it. He knew when to keep the keys on his belt and when to slip them to the man in charge of the ropes. Sometimes, if the coin was good, a prisoner who should have felt the strappato's kiss might find himself left in the dark instead, confession conveniently lost beneath a pile of damp straw. And sometimes, the jailer himself leaned in, whispered threats so vile they made a grown man tremble long before a rope ever touched his wrists. Words, after all, could break a man just as easily as iron. Cheaper, too. And what about those who watched? Imagine the others in their cells, ear pressed to the stone, hearing muffled gasps, the scrape of boots, the hiss of rope drawn tight. They'd lie awake all night, wondering, will they come for me next? They'd replay every secret they'd ever spoken, every stolen loaf, every rumor they'd whispered through the cracks. Because torture wasn't always about the man tied to the beam. It was about everyone else who feared they'd be next. Strange, isn't it? How fear drips down a corridor, just like water through a leaking roof. It seeps into your straw, your skin, your dreams. And even when you're safe, long after the ropes rot and the thumb screws gather dust in an old chest, the stories live on. They curl up in the corners of your mind and wait for the dark, ready to whisper, it could have been you. But not you, not tonight. You're far from these walls. Your wrists are free, your breath steady, your pillow soft and warm beneath your cheek. The only drip you'll hear is the hush of your own heartbeat. No rope, no iron, no cruel room hidden beneath a castle floor. Just my voice reminding you. The truth is quieter, smaller, but no less haunting when you press your ear to the past. Next, we'll light a candle and follow a man whose footsteps echoed down these same corridors, but softer, kinder. The priest who came when the cell was darkest, who offered not torture, but a last chance for mercy. So breathe easy. Close your eyes if you haven't yet. Let the torch go out behind you. I'll be right here, waiting to guide you into the hush of the priest's candlelit visit. Sleep softly, friend. The chains can't follow you here. Next, let's follow the softest footsteps in these cold corridors. The ones that don't come with jangling keys or the scrape of a drawn blade, but with the hush of whispered prayers and the faint, sweet scent of beeswax drifting ahead of him. The priest, the one man who could slip between the bars and the stones, crossing that fragile line between the living and the almost forgotten. Picture it. It's late. So late that even the mice in the straw pause to listen. The torch in the hall gutters low, its flame licking the damp air before sputtering back to life. Down the passage comes a flicker of warm light, softer than the guard's harsh lantern, steadier than the moon's pale gaze through the slits in the stone. And at the center of that glow, the priest. His robe brushes the flagstones with a sound like dry leaves. In his hand, a single candle drips wax onto his knuckles, but he doesn't flinch. The jailer lumbers behind him, keys swinging, boots heavy, but for once his voice is hushed. He opens the door to the cell with a grunt, steps aside, and lets the priest slip through the narrow gap, as if he were made of the same smoke that curled from his candle's tiny flame. Imagine you're the one lying there, curled up on your side, straw scratching your cheek, your wrists raw from rope or iron. You blink against the sudden light, too bright for eyes grown used to shadows. And there he is, kneeling beside you, the candle bobbing gently as he shifts his weight. His breath smells faintly of wine and old bread. He says your name softly, as if he's testing whether you still remember it yourself. "Bless me, Father," you might whisper, voice cracking like old wood. But he hushes you with a nod, pressing the candle into a small iron holder hammered into the wall, a luxury in its own way. The flickering light chases the darkness into the corners, illuminating the words you've scratched into the stone, the shiver in your shoulders you can't hide. He pulls a small leather pouch from his sleeve, a scrap of bread wrapped in linen, maybe a sip of watered wine. Not a feast, but a miracle when your belly has known only thin broth and the sharp ache of hunger. He holds it out with hands that tremble just a little, not from fear, but from the weight of so many confessions pressed into them over the years. You eat while he murmurs prayers under his breath, Latin phrases that melt into the straw, words older than the stones themselves. He dips his thumb into a vial of oil, tracing a cross on your forehead. The oil is warm where it touches your skin, a tiny spark of comfort that makes your eyes sting. For a moment, you're not a prisoner anymore. You're a child again, sitting on a rough bench while your mother tugs your hair straight, and the village priest blesses you for the harvest. Sometimes, the priest brings more than prayers. Sometimes he brings news, a letter smuggled in a fold of his robe, words from a mother too frail to visit, from a wife who weeps into her apron every night. He leans close, voice low. Your brother says he'll speak to the bailiff again. The stewer may look kindly if the harvest is good. Empty promises, maybe, but in that moment, you believe them. And that belief is enough to warm you longer than the candle's flame ever could. And then there are the confessions, the ones whispered so softly the rats have to lean in to catch them. A thief admits he lied about where he buried the coins. A man accused of witchcraft swears he only gathered herbs for his neighbor's cough. A mother, locked away for debts she could never repay, confesses she stole bread not for herself, but for the baby now sleeping, curled in a scrap of cloth in her arms. The priest listens, his eyes half closed, head nodding slowly. He does not judge, not here, not where the stone's already passed judgment enough. When he's finished, he lifts the candle again. The wax drips onto his wrist. He doesn't flinch. He places his hand on yours, the skin dry and warm, grounding you in the moment. Just one human touch in a place where human kindness has no foothold. Sleep, he murmurs. God watches even here. You almost laugh. The idea that God would stoop so low as to crawl through these corridors, stepping over straw and rat droppings, just to find you. But maybe he does. Maybe he has to. Who else would come down here, if not him? The priest leaves as quietly as he came. The candles glow shrinking into the corridors, hungry dark. The jailer swings the door shut with a soft grunt. For once, he doesn't slam it. The iron bolt slides home, but the cell feels a fraction less heavy now. The smell of wax lingers in the air, mingling with the sharp tang of old stone. You pull the scrap of bread close, your fingers brushing the cross traced on your forehead, and for a little while, just a little while, the shadows feel farther away. And you, tucked in your bed tonight, you don't need that last whispered prayer to keep the darkness from creeping in. The candle is yours to snuff out whenever you wish. No iron bolt on your door. No jailer's key rattling in the hall. Just the hush of your own breath, steady and soft while you drift. Next, we'll listen for the fools, the desperate souls who thought they could wriggle free, who saw the cracks in the walls and believed hope could slip through too. Some escaped, some didn't, but every one of them dreamed it first, lying awake as the priest's footsteps faded away. Sleep softly, and when you're ready, I'll tell you about the chisel on the stone, the spoon scratching mortar in the dead of night, the wild heartbeat of a prisoner who thought he could outwheat stone and iron. I'll be here, the candles still burning. Next, let's imagine what happens when hope refuses to lie still, when the waiting and the whispers and the priest's gentle prayers aren't enough to keep a man from dreaming of the world beyond these walls. Because no matter how thick the stone or how heavy the key, there was always someone lying in the dark, staring at the faint slit of moonlight above the window, thinking there must be a way out. Picture it, a prisoner curled on his straw pallet, ear pressed to the cold wall. He hears the guard's boots fade down the corridor, the iron bolt thunk shut. He counts the heartbeats between the footsteps and the silence. He waits for the softest creak in the rafters, the moment when the jailer's snoring begins, rattling through the hall like a promise. Then, when the breath of the prison settles into its shallow night rhythm, he moves. His hands slip under the straw, searching for the tiny treasure he's hidden there, a shard of brick chipped from the corner of the wall, or a spoon, battered and bent, stolen from a dinner bowl weeks ago. To you, it would be nothing, worthless, the kind of thing you toss into the hearth without a second thought. But here, it's everything. It's hope with a jagged edge. He presses his ear to the stone, listening for the hollow place he's tapped 1,000 times before. He starts to scrape, slow and steady, the spoon's edge whispering against the mortar. Scratch, scratch, scratch. Tiny flakes of stone tumble into his sleeve. He stops when the guard's boots echo again, heartbeat racing. He's buried his dreams in the wall itself, one scrape at a time. Now, imagine it's not just him. Maybe there's two of them, cellmates pressed shoulder to shoulder, taking turns at the wall. They speak in hisses, half-breaths, quiet, too loud. Keep going. They share fantasies while they scrape. The farm they'll run away to, the forest path no hounds could ever trace, the boat waiting at the river bend to carry them anywhere but here. They imagine the smell of trees, fresh rain on their skin, the taste of bread that isn't sour with fear. Sometimes it wasn't a wall at all. Picture a prisoner at the iron bars, peering through the darkness at a guard nodding off by the gate. Maybe this prisoner's braver, or more foolish. He saved up a handful of coins, filched from a smuggled pie or a family gift slipped through the bars. He presses them into the guard's palm, each coin a whispered promise. Look away, just once. And sometimes the guard does. He lets the prisoner slip out into the courtyard under a sickle moon, feet slapping on the cobbles. But freedom was never as simple as a bribe or a loose stone. There were dogs in the yard, hungry and half-wild. There were neighbors who owed the Lord a favor. And what better way to pay it back than by pointing a shaking finger when the bailiff came knocking at dawn? So made it anyway. There are stories, half true, half dream, of men who burrowed through dirt under the cell wall, emerging in the moat under cover of fog. Of a woman accused of petty theft who slipped through the kitchen door in borrowed servant's rags, never to be seen again. Or the boy who shimmied down the latrine chute, desperate enough to crawl through the filth if it meant seeing daylight without bars in the way. But for every tale of escape, there were 10 of failure. Imagine a tunnel half dug, the soil caving in around desperate hands, the muffled shout when a guard's torch flickered through the gap. Picture the prisoner dragged back through the gate, wrists bleeding, hope trailing behind him like a torn cloak. They'd toss him onto the straw, half beaten, half relieved to be breathing at all. He'd lie there, eyes open to the ceiling, scratching at the stone with the same spoon he once believed would set him free. And the rest? Well, they became lessons. The jailer would point out the patched wall to new arrivals. See that? Last fool who tried to run. You can try too, if you've got the belly for it. But you'll be back here, same as him. Or worse. And the prisoner, the one who scraped and scraped. He'd sit in the corner, nails broken, eyes hollow, whispering his escape plans to no one. But here's the thing. The dream never really died. Even the ones who failed, who limped through the courtyard chained tighter than before, would lie awake at night, fingers tracing the cracks they'd once widened with trembling hands. They'd pass their secrets along like heirlooms to the next prisoner who came whispering, "Is it true? Did you ever almost make it?" And so the foolish plans stayed alive, chiseled into stone, tucked into the straw, hope like a weed that kept sprouting back, no matter how often it was trampled under boots. You, here in your warm bed, you know how that hope feels. Maybe not in chains and stone walls, but in the secret corners of your mind that press against your own barriers. You know how it feels to dream of a way out, from pain, from worry, from whatever cage you've built for yourself. And you know how some dreams stay tucked in the cracks, waiting for the night to come whisper them awake. But tonight, you don't need to dig your way out of anything. The air is soft. The door is unlocked. There's no guard with an oil lamp. No dogs waiting in the yard. Just your breath, slow and easy, and the gentle creak of your house settling as you drift. Next, we'll listen for a different echo. The stories of the women who found themselves behind these same bars. They didn't scrape at walls so often, but their secrets were no less sharp. The prison was cruel to them in ways the stone remembers, even now. Next, let's step into the quieter corner of this old fortress, where the iron hinges creak less often, but the silence hums with secrets just the same. Because behind these walls, it wasn't only hungry thieves or drunken debtors who found themselves counting cracks in the stone. Sometimes it was women, though they were far fewer than the men. Each one carried a weight the straw could never soften. Picture her, a young woman in a rough-spun dress, hair tucked under a faded scarf. Her fingers are red from scrubbing floors, the smell of hearth smoke clinging to her skin. Maybe she's a midwife accused of using the wrong herbs, or a farmer's wife who plucked one too many apples from the Lord's orchard when her children's bellies growled with hunger. Or maybe she's a girl who looked too long at a man with coin in his purse and no kindness in his eyes. And now she sits on the cold stone floor, staring at her wrists, wondering how fast a rumor can bloom into chains. Women's cells weren't always the deepest or the darkest. They were tucked away, sometimes at the top of a tower, a space too small to store barrels or firewood. The windows up here were a little bigger, letting in scraps of moonlight that brushed their cheeks in the night like the memory of a mother's hand. But the loneliness was deeper than any dungeon. The walls didn't echo with gossip and jokes the way the men's corridors did. These cells hummed with softer sounds, a single voice murmuring a prayer, a lullaby hummed for a baby left behind, a sob stifled in a handful of straw. Imagine one woman, let's call her Agnes, fingers raw from twisting her apron into knots as she waits for a verdict she half understands. They said she was a witch. She wasn't. She knew which weeds eased a cough, how to mix onion skins with tallow for the neighbor's fever. But the Lord's wife lost her child in the middle of the night, and the midwife's name slipped too easily from someone's bitter tongue. So here she sits, watching the thin line of dawn slip through the narrow window like a blade of mercy she knows will never come. The jailer visits less often when the prisoner is a woman, unless she has coin or favors or the promise of a bribe tucked in her pocket. Some turned away when he leaned too close, the stale stink of wine on his breath. Others bartered their fear for a softer bed, a thicker blanket, a wedge of cheese tucked under the straw where the guards wouldn't find it. It's cruel to think about, but behind these walls, kindness was currency, and the jailer's mercy was worth what you could pay, with coin or without. And sometimes, hush now, lean closer. Sometimes a woman found her strength in secrets that slipped through the bars like candle smoke. Imagine a sister who sneaks in when the guard's eyes grow heavy. She presses a bundle of cloth into the prisoner's hands. Fresh bread, a letter scribbled on stolen parchment, a promise that the priest will speak to the steward tomorrow. Hope passed from one set of trembling fingers to another. Not always enough, but better than nothing at all. In the hush of midnight, you might hear her talking to herself. A soft chant, a prayer, or a string of names. Her children, her mother, the neighbors who might still remember she once shared her bread with them when their firewood ran low. Each name is a thread tying her to the world outside, pulling her away from the darkness that creeps along the walls. Some women left those cells broken, branded as thieves, paraded through the streets in stocks, their heads bowed under a hail of insults and rotten fruit. Others walked free, heads held high despite the stares that followed them for years to come. And some never left at all, their names forgotten, their straw mats swept clean for the next soul to lie down and whisper her own story to the stones. Funny how those voices linger. People say that in certain ruins, castles half-eaten by ivy and centuries, if you stand in the tower just before dawn, you can hear a woman's hum. No words, just the same lullaby she sang to herself when the guard's footsteps faded away and the rats settled in the corners to listen. A song stitched together from scraps of memory and dreams of doorways that might open again one day. And you, here warm under your blanket, you get to listen to her voice from a place she could only dream about, safe, fed, free to walk into the sunlight whenever you wish. The only chains are the ones you choose to carry. And tonight, you can slip them off as easily as you turn your pillow to the cool side. So rest easy. Let Agnes and the others stay behind these walls tonight, not forgotten, but honored in your dreams. Their voices don't echo here to haunt you, only to remind you how fierce hope can be, even when all the doors are locked. Next, we'll scratch at the straw again and feel the crawling things that carried a different kind of punishment. Because sometimes a prisoner didn't need rope or iron to suffer. Sometimes all it took was the invisible itch of the smallest living thing. Next, let's crouch down, closer to the floor, closer than the jailer ever did. Because not all torments here came with the rattle of chains or the crack of rope against bone. Some were smaller, quieter. They crawled into the straw, burrowed under skin, and did their work one tiny bite at a time. Picture it. A cold dawn slipping through the narrow window slit. Its light just enough to show you the shiver that runs along your arm. You scratch. It's almost absent-minded at first. A tickle at the nape of your neck. A pinch along your ribs where your rough linen shirt rides up in the night. You scratch again, and then you feel it. The soft, skittering legs of something that lives where you sleep. The lice came first, always the lice. They loved the straw, the grime caked in your hair, the sweat that never truly washed away. They were so small you almost pitied them. Tiny specks of life feeding on your own blood, making you their world while your own shrank to 4 damp walls. You'd find them crawling along your collar, your sleeves, the seams of your blanket if you were lucky enough to have one. And you'd pick them off, crush them between your fingernails, flick them away like the hope you could never quite kill. Listen, in the dark, you could almost hear them. Not the lice themselves, but the restless shuffle they caused. Prisoners turning, scratching, cursing under their breath. A soft chorus of skin against straw, nails against skin. You might even share tricks with your neighbor through the wall. Vinegar rag tied around your neck to keep the worst of them away. A smear of ash along your sleeves so they'd crawl elsewhere. But they always came back, no matter what you did. They thrived on your helplessness. And then there was the jail fever, the invisible curse that drifted from one coughing mouth to another. It crept through the corridors like a rumor, only far deadlier. Jail fever, what we now call typhus, fed on filth, on overcrowded cells where the air turned thick with damp breath and the stale, sour tang of human closeness. You could feel it building in your bones before you even realized what it was. Picture a man lying 2 cells down. He starts with a shiver, then a deep, hacking cough that rattles his ribs. He pulls his blanket tighter, but it feels like ice anyway. His cellmate backs into the corner, pressing his shoulder blades into the stone, eyes wide, because he knows what comes next. The sweat that soaks the straw, the stink that clings to the walls long after the body is carried out. And the worst part? The knowledge that no door, no prayer, no bribe could lock that fever out once it settled in. Sometimes, the jailer would drag the sick out before they died, dump them in the yard for the night air to finish what the fever started. Other times, they died right there in the straw, their last breath a sigh that misted into the chill air before vanishing through the cracks. And when they were gone, the lice didn't go with them. They waited, skittering across the straw, hungry for the warmth of the next trembling body. Jail fever didn't care about guilt or innocence. It killed the petty thief and the nobleman alike. Whole jails emptied out not because the jailer turned his keys, but because the fever turned them into crypts. The local villagers feared the word more than they feared any prisoner's escape, because once the fever slipped out under the door, it crawled through the streets like a living shadow, slipping into cottages and barns and cradles where babies slept. But here's the bitter truth. Even in that misery, a strange, terrible solidarity formed. A man might brush lice from his cellmate's collar without a second thought, because they knew they were all marked by the same tiny monsters. They'd share rags dipped in vinegar, scraps of herbs the priest brought in secret. Sometimes they'd talk through the night, scratching, scratching, scratching. The itch became part of the rhythm, the lullaby that kept the fear at bay. Funny how the smallest things can be the cruelest. Not the thumb screws or the ropes, but the itch that never let you sleep. The cough that never left your lungs. The fear that you might wake up tomorrow and find your own skin cold and still while the lice crawled on to their next warm meal. But you don't have to feel them tonight. No straw under your back. No bite at your hairline. You're warm, your sheets clean, your pillows soft. If there's an itch, it's just your mind drifting through these old shadows, not a living thing burrowing under your skin. So close your eyes, scratch if you must, and then let it go. Drift away from the stone and the fever and the restless, crawling dark. The only thing that should keep you awake tonight is this story, curling around you like a blanket stitched together from centuries of secrets. Next, we'll sit with the prisoners who weren't left to scratch and shiver on bare straw. Not all suffered equally. Some knew how to slip a coin through the right palm, how to buy a softer bed, warmer food, maybe even a bit of mercy stitched into the edges of their cell. Because in this world, silver was the strongest key of all. Next, let's watch the shadows shift just a little when silver slips between fingers. Because not every prisoner lay awake on damp straw, scratching at lice, and counting the coughs of the man dying 2 cells down. Some learned, or always knew, that mercy has a price. And if your purse was full enough, the jailer's keys turned smoother, the guards looked the other way more often, and the darkness seemed, somehow, a little warmer. Picture him, a merchant's son, caught with his accounts a touch too clever, or a minor noble accused of slandering the wrong man at the wrong feast. He's led through the same courtyard, boots slick with the same mud, the same iron manacles digging crescents into his wrists. But when a heavy door swings open, the guards don't shove him into the deepest pit. Instead, they guide him, almost gently, up a narrow stairway to a small chamber perched above the rest. This cell isn't luxury. Don't mistake it for a bedchamber lined with silk, but it's better. The walls are dry mostly. The straw on the floor is fresher, the scent of mold less bitter. There's a low wooden cot, splintered at the edges but still a step up from sleeping with rats at your feet. A blanket, coarse but thick enough to tuck around shivering shoulders when the frost seeps through the stones. And the food? Picture a tray passed through the bars. Not just thin broth, but a chunk of cheese that still smells faintly of the creamery. Maybe even a crust of bread with a smear of lard, or a boiled egg tucked into the corner. Small luxuries, but each bite a reminder that you are not like the man scratching sores in the cell below. Not quite. Not yet. Of course, none of this comes free. It never did. You'd slip coins to the jailer, hidden in the hem of a cloak your wife pressed into your hands before the gate clanged shut, or a ring pulled from your finger, a family seal, heavy with stories, now traded for a better pillow. The jailer would weigh in his palm, nodding, tucking it away with a grunt that meant you'd bought another night without hunger scraping at your ribs. And the guards, well, they too found comfort in your coin. For a little silver, they deliver a letter to your solicitor in the village, or smuggle in a flask of brandy, corked tight so the smell wouldn't drift into the corridor. They tip their caps as they lock the door behind them, already dreaming of the ale your bribe would buy at the tavern that night. Sometimes your family would visit, not pressed against an iron grate like the poor, their breath fogging in the cold. No, they'd be shown to a narrow stone passage, a small door opened just enough for your wife to slip you a pouch of coins, her gloved hand trembling in yours for a moment before the guard coughed behind her. She'd whisper words you'd cling to later. "We're trying." The steward listens. "Keep your chin up." And you'd nod, pulling the blanket tighter around your shoulders when she slipped back through the gate, her scent lingering on your sleeve for an hour before the cold stole it away. Imagine, too, the jealous eyes. The men below you, who heard you pacing on the boards overhead, heard the guards call you my lord instead of thief or cur. They'd mutter curses through cracked lips, wonder how many coins it would take to trade places with you, if only for a night. But envy was just another form of currency in these walls, traded in whispers, swapped for scraps of gossip or promises that never quite came true. It didn't always guarantee safety. Wealth bought comfort, yes, but also made you a target. A guard short on wages might rummage through your things while you slept, lifting rings and coins from your cloak while humming a hymn to drown out your shallow breathing. A fellow prisoner, trusted too quickly, might slip poison into your brandy, dreaming of the purse your family might pay for revenge. The walls themselves seemed to sigh whenever gold crossed the threshold, a reminder that stone knows no loyalty. And yet, when you lay down at night, the blanket pulled snug around your chest, your belly heavy with more than broth and stale bread, you could almost forget the bars. Almost. You'd tell yourself the steward would rule in your favor soon, that the bailiff's son would deliver your letter, that your name, your good name, still carried weight beyond the iron door. Sometimes you'd lie awake, listening to the groans and coughs drifting up through the cracks. The lice might stay away for now. The fever might skip your cell for now. And in that warmth, in that fragile comfort, you'd hold tight to the one lie that money let you believe, that you were not truly like them. Not yet. You, lying here tonight, you felt it too, in your own way, how a bit of comfort can blur the edges of fear, how a warm blanket, a fuller belly, A kind word slipped into your hand can make the walls recede, even if only until morning. Maybe that's the deepest truth hidden in these old stones. The price of mercy was always a secret deal, whether paid in coin or in pieces of your soul. So drift now. Let your mind wander through that quiet cell above the others. Not the filthiest, not the finest. Just enough straw to keep your bones off the stone. Just enough cheese to remind you of home. And when you close your eyes, remember, no bribe needed here. No coin has slipped through the cracks. You are free and warm, and tomorrow the door will open not because you paid for it, but because it was never locked in the first place. Next, we'll stand outside again, under the open sky, and see what waited for the ones who weren't kept behind bars at all. The stocks, the pillory, the public shame that made a prisoner's cell look like a kindness. Because sometimes the harshest punishment wasn't hidden in the dark. Sometimes it stood in the village square, under the eyes of everyone you ever knew. Next, let's leave the stone walls behind for a moment. Let's stand where the air moves freer, where the sun finds your face, but there's no comfort in its warmth, not when every pair of eyes in the village turns to you and never looks away. Because for some prisoners, the real punishment was never the cell. It was the stocks, the pillory, that stage where your own neighbors became your judge, jury, and cruelest jailer of all. Picture it, the village square at dawn, the chill clinging to the mist as the first traders set up their stalls. There, near the well and the market cross, stand the wooden frames, splintered, stained, older than most of the folk who gather to watch. The stocks, two rough boards with holes cut to clamp your ankles tight, so your feet jut out for all to see. Or worse, the pillory, where your head and hands are trapped together, your back bent in that crooked arch until your spine aches like a plow horse's after a long, wet day in the fields. You might think this was a mercy compared to the dark cell. No lice scratching at your skin. No jail fever to settle in your chest. But the stocks had their own bite, sharper than any iron chain. It was shame, and that was a wound that never quite healed. Imagine you, standing there, a petty thief perhaps, a gossip who let slip a secret about the steward's daughter, or a woman who dared to haggle too fiercely with the baker and found herself called a cheat for it. The bailiff's men lead you through the streets, ropes knotted around your wrists. Children follow, wide-eyed, skipping ahead to see who's next. The butcher wipes his hands on his apron, muttering to his apprentice about how thieves always get what's coming. The boards creak open, the same wood that held your father once for unpaid taxes, or your cousin when he was caught poaching rabbits from the Lord Warren. Your head ducks through the top hole, your neck scraping the splinters, and then your wrists slide in, one then the other. The bailiff slams the wood shut, and the iron pin drops into place with a dull thunk that makes your teeth ache. Now you're on display. Now the real cell begins. Not stone and straw, but eyes. So many eyes. Picture the hours stretching ahead of you like a road that never bends. The sun crawls across the sky while you shift your feet, trying to ease the cramp in your legs. Your shoulders burn from the unnatural bend. Your scalp prickles with sweat that flies and gnats cling to. The first passers-by mostly stare. Some spit at the dirt by your feet. Then comes the real show. The jeers, the pointed fingers, the old woman with her basket of soft fruit that's gone half-rotten since the last market day. One by one, they throw it, a plum bursting on your shoulder, a tomato splattering your chin. If you're unlucky, the children come closer. They call you names you never knew they'd learned. They poke your ribs with sticks, daring each other to see who's bold enough to get a slap from the constable for pushing too far. They laugh, and that laughter, that's the part that sinks into your bones long after the stocks have been unlocked. Yet sometimes, kindness surprises you. Picture a neighbor you once lent a spade to. He slips behind the crowd, pressing a mug of water to your lips. Not too much, or the bailiff might notice and cuff him for meddling. Or a sister, scarf pulled low over her hair, whispering that your mother's keeping the fire warm, that they'll scrub your clothes when you're home. Hope, even here, tastes like cool water on a parched tongue. Hours pass like a slow poison. Your knees buckle, your shoulders sag. The jeers grow tired as the market packs up for the night. Someone tugs at your hair for good measure before they wander off. Baskets empty now of cabbages and cruelty alike. At last, the constable returns. His breath stinks of ale. His boots scuff the dirt as he leans in, fiddling with the iron pin until the top board creaks open. You step free, but your body doesn't feel free. Your neck is raw where the wood rubbed it red. Your wrists tingle, pins and needles crawling up to your shoulders. In your head, that's the heaviest of all. You carry the looks, the laughter, the sticky fruit drying on your collar like a badge that won't wash out. Sometimes, for the poorest, this was the real prison. Not the stones, not the straw, but the memory of the stocks. The way neighbors crossed the street when you passed. The whisper that followed you into church, into the fields, in the market square, where you'd once stood proud with your own stall. Some would stand taller afterward, shoulders squared, chin lifted, daring anyone to say their name. But many would hunch themselves smaller each time the word thief drifted their way, even years later, long after the bruises faded. And yet, compared to the darkness of the cell, the jail fever, the rattling keys in the corridor, the stocks could be a mercy, a punishment measured in hours, not months. Humiliation instead of iron shackles. Some even laughed as they climbed out, the shame like vinegar on a wound. Sharp, cleansing over fast. Better a face full of rotten cabbage than bones rotting in the dark. You, here in your bed, you felt that sting in your own life. Not the stocks, but the eyes that judge, the whispers that cling. And maybe you've known the comfort too, the way a single friendly voice cuts through the jeers, like a cool drink press to chapped lips. So rest now, knowing no square waits for you in the morning. No pillory creaking open to take your head. No crowd gathering to measure your worth by how straight you stand with rotten fruit dripping down your neck. The only eyes on you tonight are mine, soft and distant, telling you that you're free and always have been. Next, we'll linger on the prisoners who never found their way back. Because not every sentence ended with freedom or shame. Some simply vanished behind stone and soil, a grave dug shallow, marked only by the rustle of wind through the weeds. Next, let's drift deeper into the hush, to where even the rats pause at the threshold. Because not every prisoner's tale ended with a door swinging open or the stocks creaking in the village square. For some, there was no bargain to be struck, no bribe to be slipped into a waiting palm. Just the slow, final fade of breath into the cold stones. The prison's truest sentence, hidden behind every whisper and clink of keys. Picture this. You're lying on the straw, your back pressed flat against the chill. The tiny window above you leaks in dawn light that feels thinner than ever before. You've counted every drip of water from the ceiling crack for days, watched each drop splatter into the puddle near your boots. Now you've lost count, your thoughts drifting somewhere beyond the walls, back to a cottage roof you might have patched if you'd only made it home again. No priest tonight, not this time. Maybe he came last week, pressing his thumb to your forehead, words in Latin you couldn't catch between your ragged coughs. Now your lips move in prayers you learned as a child. Your mother's voice woven through the syllables, softer than the straw rustling beneath you. You press your fingertips to the wall one last time, feel its damp grit under your nails. A farewell to the stone that's held your secrets closer than any lover ever did. It doesn't always happen alone, though. Sometimes the cough echoes down the corridor. Other prisoners lying awake on their pallets, listening. They know the rhythm too well. The gasping, the shuddering pause. A ragged breath that never returns. Someone sighs into the dark. He's gone. And the drip from the ceiling goes on, as if nothing changed. When the jailer comes at dawn, the keys clink softer. He doesn't shout this time, just pushes the door with his shoulder, eyes squinting at the bundle in the straw. He nudges your foot with the toe of his boot, checking if you're bluffing. Some prisoners do, you see, hoping a good imitation of death might win them a taste of freedom. But your chest doesn't rise. Your lips have gone blue. The lice crawl away to the next warm body. He clicks his tongue, makes a mark on the tally slate, and moves on to the next cell. What happens next? Not a grand procession. No priest in shining robes. No bell tolling your name over the rooftops. You're no lord. No merchant with a wife to weep on your marble headstone. Your name half forgotten by dusk. The guards lift you by the shoulders and ankles, your limbs stiff as firewood. Sometimes they wrap you in an old blanket, more warmth than you knew while alive, or they just drag you down the corridor, straw clinging to your hair. Outside the jail walls, there's a patch of earth, not a graveyard with carved crosses or candle stubs flickering in the wind. Just a slope behind the North Tower, where the ground sinks soft from all the bodies laid down there before you. No coffin, sometimes not even a shroud. The soil welcomes you as it did the thieves, the poachers, the mothers who wept over debts they could never repay. They dig shallow. The jailer's men have no reason to break their backs for the dead. The hole is just wide enough, just deep enough that when the wind blows cold at night, sometimes the weeds shift and something pale shows through before the earth settles again. Across, if you're lucky, a bit of scrap wood jammed into the dirt, maybe with your name scratched into it by a sympathetic guard. But more often, nothing at all. The grass grows over your bones by spring, and the next prisoner never knows you were there. And yet, listen closely, the prison remembers. The walls keep the sound of your final breath, tucked in the mortar beside the secrets of every man and woman who waited for a verdict that never came. The stones grow colder each time, the drip from the ceiling more patient. A reminder that here, in the end, no silver buys mercy, no rumor opens the gate. Death is the true warden, and his keys never rust. But strange, too, how a life can echo even from an unmarked grave. Years later, a child might scramble over the north slope, searching for beetles or wildflowers, and pause when the wind makes the weeds shiver. He feels something, a chill, a hush, as if the ground itself remembers the stories buried beneath his feet. And maybe, just maybe, he runs home a little faster, whispering to his mother of ghosts that drift up from the dirt when dusk gathers in the corners of the yard. You, here under your blanket, you don't have to lie on cold straw tonight. Your breath is steady. No damp patch of earth waits for you at dawn. You get to wake, stretch, pour warm water in a clean basin. Watch the sun creep up your walls with no bars to catch its light. The only grave here is the one you've left behind in these stories. Old fears, old shame, old chains that can't follow you when your eyes flutter open tomorrow. So rest now. Let the weeds grow wild over those old bones. Let the ghosts hum their lullaby to the stones, but not to you. You are warm and living and free. Next, we'll drift one more step further, into the few who didn't lie quietly under the soil, but lived on as stories, cautionary tales told over ale and firelight. Because prisoners, once gone, rarely stayed silent forever, not when rumor could keep them alive for generations. Next, we'll drift away from shallow graves and rusted keys and breathe in the hush that remains when footsteps fade for good, or so people thought. Because prisons Like any place soaked in fear and hope and whispered bargains, grow their own ghosts. Not always the rattling chains you picture in lantern-lit tales, but softer shapes, stories that cling like mist to the walls long after the last straw has been swept away. Picture this. The jail has been empty for decades now. Ivy creeps up the stone. The iron bars on the tiny windows are half-rotted, leaning like old men who've forgotten how to stand straight. The door swings on its hinges in the wind, sighing as it closes on nothing but damp air. The village children dare each other to peek inside. They slip between the weeds, giggling until the hush swallows their laughter like a mouthful of snow. Inside, the walls remember. The drip of water still echoes from the ceiling, a ghost in itself, repeating the same slow heartbeat that once counted down to verdicts never spoken aloud. If you press your ear to the stone, some say, you'll hear the scratching of a spoon on mortar, the hush of a prayer breathed by a man who never saw the sun rise again. Some ghosts are more than sound. Picture a merchant's son, the one who bribed his way to a softer cot, a thicker blanket. They say he never left when the fever came for him. He lingers in the old north cell, pacing just before dawn. If you wait by the crack in the door, the one where the iron bolt rusted clean through, you might glimpse a pale hand pressing against the stone, searching for coins long spent, bargaining for comforts that mean nothing now. Then there's the girl. They always tell her story last, as if saving the coldest chill for when the candles burn low. A young midwife, her name half lost to time, locked up when rumor called her a witch. No one marked where they buried her behind the tower wall, but the weeds know. Some nights, when the wind shifts, the villagers swear they hear her hum. Not a curse, not a howl, just a lullaby she once sang to a baby who never woke. The tune slips through the tower window and drifts across the courtyard, curling under doors, brushing the necks of anyone foolish enough to linger after dusk. Even the jailer, gruff and mortal, left a ghost behind. He was no hero, his kindness as thin as the soup he ladled through the bars. But people say you can still hear his keys. A jingle in the corridor when there's no one there. A scrape against the wall, the sigh of boots on stone. It said he checks each cell as he always did, counting the living and the dead alike, never quite sure if he was warden or prisoner himself. And what did the villagers do with these tales? Well, they told them, of course, by firelight when the wind rattled the shutters, when the fields lay frozen under winter's grip. A father might hush his son's fear with a joke. Behave, or the jailer will come for you, keys rattling like bones. But the boy still lay awake, eyes wide, listening for the click and scrape that only the old stones remember. Sometimes a traveling peddler would pass through and swear he saw shadows moving behind the iron bars, just shapes, nothing you could name. Or he'd feel a sudden chill when he stepped too close to the grave slope behind the north tower, as if someone beneath the weeds exhaled a cold breath up through his boots. He'd hurry on to the next village, coin purse clutched tight, his story already half grown in his mouth to trade for supper and ale. Funny how these ghost stories hold just enough truth to stay alive. After all, people need their fears dressed up in old clothes and flickering candlelight. It's safer that way, to speak of chains and cell doors and keys that never stop turning, to remind themselves that what happened in the dark didn't stay locked away forever. But you're not standing in the ruin tonight. You're not pressing your ear to a damp stone, listening for the scrape of a ghost spoon. Your warm, soft blanket pulled tight, the hush of your room gentle and safe. These old prisoners and their restless shadows can't slip under your door. They stay tucked behind their rotted bars, pacing corridors that crumble a little more each year. Maybe you'll dream of them tonight, the merchant's son searching his pockets for coins long spent. The jailer counting keys that never fit a lock anymore. The girl humming a lullaby to no one but the wind. They're not here to frighten you, just to remind you how long hope can linger, even when the flesh that carried it is long gone to soil and stone. Next, we'll slip back into the realm of the living, to those who didn't stay behind these walls at all. The ones who never saw the inside of the cell, because they held the power to decide who did. The lords, the stewards, the magistrates. The men whose words carried more weight than any iron chain. Because in this world, a single signature could free you or bury you alive behind cold walls. Next, let's leave the chill corridors for a moment and climb the steps to where the real walls stood. Not of stone and iron, but of parchment, ink, and whispered words passed between men who never felt a straw scratch their backs. Because for every prisoner counting drips from the ceiling, there was a lord, a steward, a magistrate, the ones who held the keys without ever touching them. Picture this, a manor hall just past dusk, rushlights flickering low while servants sweep the hearth clean. At the long oak table, the steward sits hunched over parchment, wax seal warm beneath his thumb. He's no king, but in this shire, his word can buy a man's freedom or slip him into the stocks come market day. He taps a quill against his teeth, thinking not of the petty thief coughing in the north cell, but the rent owed on his tenant fields, the cattle gone lame, the neighbor's whispered insult that still stings like a fresh welt. Outside the window, you'd see the torches in the jail flicker like fireflies in the fog. But here inside, it's warm, the air spiced with ale and wood smoke. A knock at the door interrupts the steward's thoughts. In comes the bailiff, hat in hand, boots muddy from trudging the village paths. He lays out the names. The miller's boy, sir, caught with a purse that wasn't his. The widow with the hens, claims the neighbor's dog did it, but the feathers tell another tale. And so the balance begins. Mercy isn't a virtue here, it's a transaction. A pardon for the miller's boy might mean the miller owes a favor come harvest. A harsher sentence might send a message that the steward won't be made a fool of. The lord above him might never hear these small decisions, but the steward's tally book grows fat with them. Debts measured not in coin, but in loyalty, silence, and fear. Now, picture the magistrate, the man who truly signs the parchment that seals your fate. He arrives once a month, maybe less if the roads are bad. He rides in, cloak flapping behind him, boots clean from the fresh straw laid at the manor steps. He nods to the steward, glances over the list of names, the scribbled confessions. He might listen to a plea, might not. His mind is already half on a meal waiting in the hall, the cup of mulled wine, the warm hearth where his own children sleep unbothered by thoughts of chains and stocks. To the prisoner waiting behind the bars, the magistrate is a god in human skin. A word from him, and the bolt slides back. Another word, and the rope is strung high on the village green. But to the magistrate, the man behind the bars is just ink on a page. A smear of guilt or innocence, easier to rub away than the stain on his cloak from his horse's muddy hooves. Sometimes, though, that godlike power trembles. Picture a letter pressed into the magistrate's palm, sealed with the wax of a noble house higher than his own. A favor called in from years ago. Overlook this matter. The boy is foolish, but his father has always been loyal. So the boy's cell stays empty come morning, straw still warm where his head lay the night before. No announcement, no apology, just an empty space on the tally slate. A hush that drifts through the corridor like a breeze from a door left ajar. Meanwhile, another prisoner waits for news that never comes. No letter slips under the magistrate's door for him. His family too poor to bribe the steward, too voiceless to whisper in the right ear at the right feast. His name stays scrawled in the ledger, waiting for its verdict like a candle guttering low in the draft. And when the magistrate rides away, cloak snapping behind him. That name stays behind, pressed into the stone and straw, unpardoned, unspoken for. It's strange, isn't it? The real prison never lay in the mossy walls or the iron locks. It lived in the places the prisoners could never reach. The oak desk, the scratch of the quill, the thick seal pressed firm with a signet ring older than the prisoner's entire life. And the steward, the bailiff, the magistrate. They slept warm every night, their dreams rarely troubled by the men and women coughing themselves to death on the straw. Yet power has its own prison. They, too, feared the rumors that crawled through corridors like lice in the straw. They feared a lord's wrath if a favor went unpaid, a letter lost, a verdict too harsh or too soft. They feared the sudden hush that fell when they entered a tavern, the eyes that slid away too quickly. So they learned to keep the ledgers close and their voices closer, to sign their names with hands that trembled just a little, though they'd never admit it. You, though, you're not scratching at a cell wall tonight, waiting for a quill scratch to decide whether your feet ever touch grass again. No steward's favor keeps you warm. Just your own breath, your own blanket, your own door you can open whenever you wish. You've built your mercy yourself, and no ledger can snatch it away in the dark. So breathe easy. Let the parchment curl to ash in the hearth. Let the ink fade, the seals crack. Tonight, the keys stay with you, and they open nothing but dreams. Next, we'll wander back into the cells for one last lesson. The day when the prison doors opened not with mercy, but because the world outside was changing faster than the stones could hold. Because even the strongest walls crumble when the people beyond them say they've had enough. Next, let's listen for the sound that no prisoner ever truly believed they'd hear. The roar that started quiet as a cough in the straw, then grew, echoing up the stairwells and down the icy corridors until it rattled the bolts loose and made the jailer's hand tremble on his keys. Because even the thickest walls can't hold forever when the hunger for freedom swells bigger than the fear of chains. Picture it, a gray dawn, heavy clouds pressed low against the tower roof. Inside the cells, men shift in their sleep, half awake, ears twitching at the creak of boots on stone. But these boots don't belong to the guard making his slow rounds. These are faster, heavier, a clatter of footsteps that sound more like a herd of cattle breaking through a rotten fence than any patrol. The first prisoner to hear it presses his ear to the door. That old door he's kicked, scratched, cursed at for months. He feels the vibration, the deep hum of voices joined together. Voices that don't belong to the jailer or the steward or the magistrate's cold decree. Voices that belong to the people outside. The mothers, the fathers, the brothers and sisters who've stood in the yard too long with scraps of bread and bribes that never bought mercy enough. Picture a woman in the courtyard, her shawl pulled tight around her shoulders. She's the butcher's wife, sick of paying the bailiff a penny for every visit, sick of seeing her boy through the bars, his wrists raw and his voice growing smaller each week. She's not alone. The blacksmith's apprentice stands beside her, fists like hammers at his sides. A farmer, pitchfork in hand, the tines trembling not from fear, but from rage that's been waiting to bloom since the steward raised the rent and the winter grain rotted in the granary, while men starved in the cells. It starts with shouts. Open the gates, they call. A stone flies, harmless at first, clattering off the wooden postern like a warning. Then another, and another. The guards on the wall shuffle, shields clutched close, eyes darting to the captain, who mutters that the magistrate is miles away in his warm manner, his quill scratching no help at all. Inside, the prisoners hold their breath. Some press their hands to the cracks in the stone, feeling the tremor like a heartbeat shared through centuries of dam mortar. Others, the fools, or maybe the wise ones, start to laugh. It's a low, rough sound at first, then it grows, rolling down the corridor like a hymn turned inside out. The jailer stands by the main gate, keys jangling uselessly. He knows, that silver and threats mean nothing when the door itself is the only thing left standing between him and the tide building outside. He glances at the men beside him, a guard with sweat dripping from his hairline, another with a spear held so tight his knuckles go white. And then the gate shudders. Once, twice. The iron hinges moan like an old man's bones. A battering ram? Not here. Just the weight of people who've decided they're done waiting. Who've come for their sons and brothers and fathers and wives, and don't care if the jailer's ledger says they belong inside. Imagine the wood cracking, that sharp snap that makes the guards flinch back, shields raised too late. The prisoners hear it. Some cry out, pressing themselves to the bars like children waiting for the door to open on a long winter's night. Others stand silent, shoulders braced, knowing that freedom can be a blade just as easily as it's a blessing. The gate gives way with a splintering groan. In pour the villagers, faces flushed, eyes wide with fear and fury tangled, so tight you can't tell one from the other. They find the keys dropped at the jailer's feet, scattered like coins across the flagstones. They fumble with locks, fingers slick with sweat, curses flying when an old bolt jams. A man stumbles free first, his chain still dangling from his wrist. He looks up at the sky like he's seeing it for the first time, even though he stood under it every day of his life. He doesn't run. Not yet. He waits for the next prisoner, the woman he shared whispers with through a crack in the wall. She's half carried, half dragged by her sister, her feet bare, her hair matted, but her eyes bright with something that was almost dead the night before. They pour out, a ragged river of bodies. Some embrace their families right there in the courtyard, mud soaking the hems of their skirts. Others slip away through the orchard, chains clinking softly as they run. And behind them, the old jail stands open, its doors flung wide for the first time, not by keys or coins or verdicts scratched on parchment, but by the fists and boots and voices of the ones who'd had enough. Of course, not everyone walks free forever. The steward returns, red-faced, voice hoarse from shouting that justice must be done. Some prisoners are rounded up days later, found hiding in the hedgerows, half-starved but smiling like they know a secret the stones can't hold anymore. The gate is rebuilt, the locks replaced, but the cracks remain, not in the walls, but in the trust that held the prison together in the first place. And the people remember. They pass the story down like a lantern in the dark. The night the village said no more. The night the stone trembled, the hinges gave way, and the chains turned to rust beneath the orchard trees. You, here at your soft bed, you hold your own keys. You don't need a mob to tear down your door. You never built one so high. No steward can scratch your name on a page and tuck your hope away behind iron bolts. The freedom you carry is quiet, but stronger than any locked gate. The freedom to slip into sleep without fear that tomorrow someone will barter your breath for silver. So rest now. Let the roar fade to a memory, like the hush after a storm that leaves the fields washed clean. Next, we'll gather what's left, the scraps of mercy, cruelty, laughter, and rumor, and see how the stories we tell keep the prisoners alive long after the locks are gone. Because even when the walls crumble, a tale has its own kind of chain. Next, let's linger at the threshold where the gates hang crooked on their splintered hinges, where the straw lies scattered in the yard like the last secret shaken loose by the boots that fled across it. Because prisons crumble, locks rust, walls sink under ivy and rain. But the stories? They slip under doors, drift across hedgerows, settle in the corners of taverns where no stone can hold them back. Picture it. the jail long abandoned now. The villagers pick through its ruin when the winter stores run low. A plank here for patching a barn, an iron bar to mend a broken fence. Children dare each other to climb the tower steps, their laughter bouncing off stones that once swallowed sobs and gasps and prayers for mercy. No jailer shuffles behind them now, keys swinging from his belt. Only the wind sighs through the window slits, lifting old straw like confetti from a festival no one remembers clearly anymore. And yet, listen, in the warmth of the tavern just down the lane, the stories breathe on. A man with hands stained from the forge leans back on his bench, mug in hand, voice low, so the children have to hush their giggles to catch every word. My great-grandmother used to say she heard them, the prisoners. That night, when the villagers tore the gate from its hinges, she was just a girl hiding behind her mother's skirts. Swears she saw a woman run free with a baby tucked in her shawl, chains still clinking at her ankles. Across the room, an old woman rolls her eyes, but even she can't help adding her bit. The blacksmith's boy? He escaped twice, they say. Once through the orchard when the jail fever came, and once when the gate broke for good. Some folk claim he lived to 90, always looking over his shoulder, listening for the jailer's keys in his dreams. Stories like these, they're sticky. They settle in the corners of your mind, no matter how many times the steward's descendants try to rewrite them in tidy ledgers. They remind you that walls are never just stone. They're made of the men and women who sat awake on cold straw, tracing cracks with hopeful fingers, trading secrets through holes the builders never meant to leave. Imagine it. A traveling peddler passing through a century later, pausing on the slope where the unmarked graves lie hidden under weeds. He feels the wind shift, hears a rustle in the brambles, tells himself it's only a vole. But that night in the tavern, after a pint or two, he swears the ground breathed. That something in the dirt still remembers every name, every last ragged breath that rose through the straw before the earth folded it away. Funny, too, how the stories change as they pass from tongue to tongue. The cruel jailer who starved the debtors? By the time his tale is told for the 100th time, he's half villain, half poor soul trapped by his own keys, counting the ghosts in his corridor long after his bones turned to dust. The midwife accused of witchcraft? Some say she haunts the tower. Others claim she walked free when the riot came and fled into the forest. Her children's children living by the river to this day, still brewing herbs but never saying too much to the steward's men. The stories never agree, and maybe that's the truest thing about them. The prison walls were certain. Iron moss, straw, locked gates that groaned shut. But the stories are free. They slip through the gaps, skitter under thresholds, cling to the coattails of anyone willing to carry them just a little further down the lane. And what good are they? Some would say they're just ghost chatter, the idle hum of old sins and small mercies. But if you listen close, you'll hear how they remind us of the cracks in all our walls, how people bend, how hope squeezes through the smallest hole, how fear turns into laughter when enough voices rise at once. They remind us that no chain, no cell, no steward's ledger ever lasted as long as a tale whispered across a warm hearth. You, here in your bed tonight, you hold these stories now too. Not as a burden, but as a thread. The next time the wind hums against your window, or your house sighs in the dark, you might remember the drip of water on old stone, the scratch of a spoon against mortar, the soft hum of a woman's lullaby drifting through iron bars. They're not here to haunt you. They're here to remind you how the mind survives when the body is bound. So rest. Let the prison crumble again in your dreams. Let the gates hang open for good. The chains lie rusted in the grass. The mice scurry through empty cells that haven't heard a cry in 100 years. And the stories? They keep pacing those halls, gentle as ghosts, stubborn as weeds pushing through a ruined wall to reach the sun. Next, we'll let the last echoes settle in the straw and slip into a final hush. The mercy of forgetting, forgiving, and letting the iron rest. Because the best part of this old tale is that you get to leave it behind whenever you wish. Next, let's stand together in this last doorway. The one that opens not with a creak or a shove, but with the simple release of a breath. Because every prison tale, every drip of water down the stone, every whispered rumor and rattled key has led us here, to the moment when the gate swings wide, not because a mob forced it, or a magistrate signed it, or a steward sold it, but because you choose to step through it. Picture it, the old jail behind you, walls leaning under ivy's slow embrace, its corridors hollow now, filled only with the hush of your own footsteps. The straw is gone, swept out into the orchard where spring wildflowers have begun to press through the soil. The door you once feared stands open, not broken or battered, but patient, waiting for you to remember you could leave all along. The air outside is softer than you remember. It carries the smell of damp earth, the sweetness of moss warmed by the first light of dawn. You can almost taste the bread baking in the village ovens, the smoke drifting from cottage chimneys. You stand at the threshold a moment longer, your hand resting on the old, splintered wood. The same door that once held you back now swings lightly in the breeze, a hinge squeaking like a bird clearing its throat after too long in silence. Behind you, the stories linger. They breathe in the dark corners where the walls bow under centuries of secrets. The thief who escaped twice, the mother who hummed lullabies through the cracks, the jailer pacing his corridor long after his keys turned to dust. They're part of the stone now, woven so tight that even the vines growing through the windows hum their memory when the wind moves just right. But they don't follow you, not tonight, because freedom, real freedom, is not just the absence of walls. It's the mercy of choosing to let the ghosts rest where they belong. It's knowing that every chain, every verdict, every shallow grave behind the tower was just a chapter, not the whole of you. You've carried those echoes long enough. Now they can sink back into the straw, into the soft dirt behind the orchard, into the hush that rises when the last torch goes out. So step forward. Feel the ground firm under your feet. Not the uneven flagstones that scrape your soles raw, but soft grass bending to your weight like a promise. Breathe deep. The cold iron tang of the cell is gone. In its place, the warmth of your own lungs filling, emptying, filling again. No warden stand at the gate to count your steps. No ledger waits for your name. Imagine the village at the edge of the field. Not the same one that jeered in the square when the stocks bit your ankles, but one that barely remembers the shape of the old jail at all. A child runs past you, hair tangled by the wind, chasing a dog that barks at crows perched on the fence. He doesn't see the ghost of iron on your wrists. He sees only another pair of feet walking the path home. And if you turn back, if you ever do, you'll find the door still there, half-hinged, half-sinking under Ivy's slow fingers. You might lean your palm against it, feel the cold trace of all those who leaned there before you, hoping for a crack wide enough to slip through. But you won't step inside again. Not really. The walls that once kept you have no grip left on your bones. The stories will keep telling themselves in the tavern at dusk by the hearth when the wind howls. The thief's spoon scratching mortar. The steward's ink drying on yellowed parchment. The riot that cracked the gate wide. But you, my friend, you get to close your eyes knowing you're free of it all. Because the chains you carry in your mind are the only ones that ever truly hold. And tonight, even those fall away like rust flaking from an old lock. So drift now, past the orchard, past the slope where wildflowers grow tall and tangle over forgotten graves. Drift into your own warm bed, Your own safe room where the only walls are the ones that keep out the cold, not the light. There's no key needed here. No guard to check your name. Only your breath, steady and quiet, and the hush of a story that's finished its long, soft circle. Sleep well. Leave the door ajar if you like. The one in your mind, the one behind the tower. Let the wind blow through. Let the ghosts hum to the stones, while you dream of fields with no fences and nights with no iron. You're free. Always were, always will be. Good night. And thank you for listening all this way, for pressing your ear to these old walls with me, for letting the drip of the past soothe you instead of haunt you. Rest easy beyond the gate, where no story can chain you ever again.